spending time responding to sceptics. So that would be my perspective on how to deal with the challenge of knowledge sceptics. As far as the opportunity, I think there is still this opportunity to be both active in getting our science stories out into the wider community, but also I think it's very important to be responsive to media when looking for stories, and that's really the change that I've noticed over the last 5 years in my role of trying to get the message out from the lab out to the wider community, and that is we don't have to try too hard anymore. We're continuing to put out media releases and stories actively, but I think an important part of our group's job in CSIRO communication is to be quick and responsive to the many calls we get, really certainly many calls a week, but several calls a day, looking for information about climate change. So being very responsive, I think, is one important behaviour in responding to the opportunity to get the science out there. The other important thing is to maintain a consistent message that I mentioned before. Maybe I can illustrate this perhaps by delving into a bad example from my past. I haven't admitted this publicly before, but I mentioned it to Jenny about a bad mistake I think I made early on in communicating climate change. And that we had an interesting story about how rainfall has been changing in Australia. This is a number of years ago, and so about a media release saying, the story was interesting, and it's still the case that if you have a look at the Australia-wide average of rainfall, there is actually a slight positive trend. So Australia is getting wetter, but of course in most populated areas, and certainly in this part of Australia and over in the southeast and a lot of eastern Australia, drought is a pretty serious issue. But here's this interesting scientific result, and Dean Collins down here from National Climate Centre would know this as well, that if you take an Australia-wide average on rainfall, it's actually getting wetter. And that's also consistent with what we have in the physics of the planet as far as we are getting warmer and wetter, and more streams, I guess, in different parts of the world. So anyway, I put out a media release saying Australia is getting wetter, and this was in the midst of a drought. It was really sort of like aren't you telling us that it's getting drier? And so we got a call from the Minister's office, who was the Minister of Climate Change at the time, saying, can you just explain what you're saying in this media release? It's really quite confusing. So that was, I think, a statement that I diverged from this consistent message about how climate is changing in Australia for the sake of this sort of interesting bit of science that I thought was worth talking about. So I think, maybe just illustrating that, I think state that the point that we really need to be having a consistent message out there. And so to finish, because Jess did a bit of show and tell, I thought I'd also show partly a couple of examples of what we are doing to make sure that the latest science is out there. One is this brochure called The Science of Climate Change. I've left a few over on the table over there. And this is a brochure that was finished last Monday for a presentation that 3 CSIRO scientists gave to ministers and senators and their staff in Canberra on the latest science of climate change, following on from the Copenhagen conference. And this is, it's not being defensive, it's not dispelling myths or raising or putting forward answers to common sceptical questions. It's really just putting the latest science of climate change out there. So I think that's a good product. It's up on the web as well, but for a few along. Another that CSIRO contributed to is a booklet produced by the Department of Climate Change on questions and frequently asked questions in climate change. And so it was just the underlying science, making sure that the correct information is out there in the community. And there's another one called Hot Topics from the Department of Climate Change website. So perhaps with that, I guess the message from me is I think I prefer to see communicators being on the front foot, making sure that the correct information is out there rather than being defensive, and making sure the information